Everybody, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Gary Sankary. I am, first of all, I'm delighted to be here. I am ESRI, our retail industry manager. ESRI is the world's largest provider of geospatial and location intelligence software. And I'm delighted to be joined by a really blue ribbon panel here. I've got to know these folks over the last few weeks as we prepared for this, and I think this is really going to be good. Some really interesting insights are going to come out of that. What I'd like to do first of all is start with introductions, and why don't we start with Doug, if that's okay?
Sure. Thanks, Gary. Doug Roy. I'm the Chief Supply Chain Officer for Dollar Shave Club. Been in this role for about 3.5 years now. Before that, spent a lot of time at Unilever, so very familiar with the retail challenges, and also Dan and Yogurt before that, and previously automotive.
Fantastic. Next, Varun.
Hi, this is Varun. I'm a Trojan. So I currently work as the head of strategic programs in the commerce PA at Google. Prior to that, I spent some time in supply chain, logistics, and operations at Amazon. And prior to that, over a decade in automotive and aerospace industry.
Thank you very much. Jim, if you wouldn't mind going next.
Sure, Jim Prewitt. I lead the retail product management group at Yonder Software, formerly JDA Software. We're one of the largest supply chain software providers in the world. Spent time in retail, most recently at CVS Pharmacies in supply chain leadership positions and in consulting, so long retail background. Also a fellow Trojan.
Fantastic, thank you. Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here with all of you. I am co-founder and CSO at Health-Ade Kombucha. If you're not familiar with kombucha, it's a fermented tea rich in probiotics and healthy acids. I am also a Trojan from Marshall, class of 2013. Prior to living in the world of kombucha, I was in pharmaceuticals. Great,
thank you. And finally, Greg.
Hi, guys. I'm Greg Buzek, president of IHL Group. Before that, I guess we're in our 25th year, just about starting this month. And prior to that, I was a product manager at Sensormatic Electronics, as well as at NCR Corporation. So I guess my biggest claim to fame is I was the guy who just happened to be fortunate to introduce Wi-Fi into retail back in the day as a replacement for pulling wires through asbestos. So I go back a long way. So that's my background.
Well, thanks, Greg. And I intentionally put Greg at the end because we're going to start with just a really short presentation. As you know, we've been talking about this all day long, and the impact of the pandemic on the global marketplace and really in retail. I don't think retail and hospitality specifically, the effect has been pretty much unmitigated as far as I can tell. We've seen retailers and manufacturers, of whom we've got both represented here today, really have to react quickly to these massive changes in consumer behaviors, in their buying habits, the channels that companies are using to leverage, to reach their customers are changing. For some of them, they were completely eliminated. For others, they've seen an amplification of their business. I've heard a lot of different folks, they talk about triple-digit increases, specifically in food and in some of the HBA categories. So Greg, as part of his role with his company at IHL, has done a really nice survey across industries of what's been happening within the retail space. And we've got just a couple slides, I think, that'll set the stage for our discussion. So Greg, if you can see my screen.
I can.
Great. Oh, that's the first win. Cool.
Super.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. It can't be understated the impact that COVID has had and the COVID policies has had on retail around the world, retail and hospitality in particular. In fact, we've had the largest transfer of wealth ever in the industry move from what we would call first non-essential categories, such as restaurants and clothing stores, to essential categories. And it's all been dictated by government regulation and lockdowns. And the amount of that in the United States was $125 billion shifted from restaurants and mall-based stores to grocery stores, the likes of Amazon, Walmart, Target, the big Costco, the big beneficiaries of that here in the US, and $285 billion worldwide. The more devastating impact, however, has been from small to large. $250 billion in the United States alone has gone from small companies that were selling clothes, for instance, but Walmart and Costco could sell clothes. So the small companies were closed, small restaurants were closed, they're forced to shut down, and it's been devastating. An impact of upwards of 337,000 small businesses that are going to go under as a result of the policies of the government for the safety of COVID. And that has been hugely dramatic. And I just got data today. The IMF has reported that they expect 20 million people to drop back into extreme poverty as a result of COVID. So it's not just in the United States, it's worldwide. And unfortunately, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That is happening not only just on an individual basis, but also on a retail basis. So Gary, if you want to go next. So just to give you a little background of what does a typical consumer goods supply chain look like today? Well, with China being the supplier to the world prior to COVID, we generally, in the States, generally in Long Beach or Oakland, somewhere like that, we would have a manufacturer's warehouse that would have a month's supply of goods for the United States of a category. And then you have wholesale distributors that are going to have a month's supply of goods. And that's where multiple retailers are going to buy from that distributor there. Then you have the retailers warehouse themselves that has a month's supply. And then generally at the store itself, at the local store, you're going to have 2 weeks to a month's supply. And the challenge that we had with COVID during the surge is we got the equivalent of 4 Christmases in a 2-week period. And the end result is we wiped out 4 months of supply in 2 weeks in certain categories. And there was this giant hole that was left in the supply chain for things like toilet paper. You still can't get wipes in most places. Cleaning items are starting to come back in some respects, but there's this big hole that just blew up the supply chain there for those things. So go to the next slide, Gary, there, which has led to this tremendous problem with out of stocks. And that's where the big growth has come in terms of inventory distortion. So you've got out of stocks and overstocks. Out of stocks being those things that you just were out of that somebody wanted to buy and they left without buying for some reason, whether it's not the shelf is empty, which is the big one now, but it could be stuff was locked up, I couldn't find help, etc. Overstocks is when you have too much of something and you got to get rid of it, and you don't have the customers. And a lot of times they work together. For instance, like Black Friday deals, if the ads are still promoting an item and it's not in stock when it gets there because there was a strike in Long Beach, you've got this disconnect there where you can't sell it and people come in to buy it at one point, but then it comes in and you got no ads to drive traffic later, and then you've got to discount it even further there. So $1.8 trillion there in total. That's about 10.3% of same store sales, Gary, as we go forward. Just a massive thing. So if retailers fix their out of stocks and overstocks, they could increase same store sales 10.3%. So you go to the next slide, Gary. The big problem with COVID is we had all these incredible growth in digital journeys, digital where you're going to use your phone, your tablet, et cetera. You're going to buy online, but you've got a store fulfillment component to that. And retailers just weren't ready. Less than 15% of all retailers were ready to do click and collect or buy online, pick up in store prior to COVID. And why that's so devastating in some respects, if you look at local delivery from the store, compared to somebody that walks in the store, they lose 8.2 points of margin for every order that is a local delivery compared to that person in the store. Now, when you look at a supermarket, the typical supermarket only makes 1 cent on the dollar. So they're losing 7.2 cents on every delivery order if they have not optimized their systems and their processes that is in place there. So it was critical to get that optimized. It's been covered up quite a bit because of the increased walk-in traffic was so severe during that time. But generally where you would have efficiencies that would occur, your profitability would go up faster than your sales would go up. For a retailer that's efficient, in this case, what happened is the sales went up and the profitability dropped lower than what it should have been there because of that inefficiency. So that's kind of the background of the whole thing going on with COVID. I will tell you there is a massive difference based on where you live on terms of what's going on. We have a study right now that is showing the Southeast and the Atlantic region for convenience stores versus West and California. And I just pulled this up. The sales growth in 2020, just by regional, is the sales growth in the Atlantic Southeast region is 181% of that of the West Coast region because of the different policies in terms of lockdowns, people being able to drive, go to work, etc. And that's just one example of that there. So with that, I'll turn it back to Gary.
Thanks, Greg. So that's the stage we're in. And I know we've had now 2 reporting quarters for retailers since the pandemic started, and you know, it was really obvious, especially when you talk about the winners, that the retailers have really focused on efficiencies. We've seen their results improve pretty dramatically from the first reporting season to the second reporting season. Both at Target and at Walmart and Best Buy, we saw profits much improved, and I'm guessing a lot of that has to do with them realizing that this is kind of here to stay and something that they need to figure out how to do more efficiently. So let me ask our first question. One of the things that we talk about a lot with COVID is it's not that new capabilities it's not introduced new capabilities into commerce. It's really accelerated things that were already in play, but just kind of had some slow adoption along the way. And I'd be curious, you know, Doug, you were kind of nodding on that. What are your thoughts on the acceleration of adoption for these COVID, or, you know, the e-commerce, things like buy online, pick up, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think, you know, if these retailers and suppliers, the one challenge for sure is when something like COVID hits, if you aren't already working on these longer term strategies, you're going to be in big trouble, right? The reactiveness is just not going to be there. But you have seen a huge focus there to try and grow those capabilities. Times like COVID for sure are times where you remember just how important the supply chain is and how resiliency is key, and contingencies are important. I think, you know, you think about capabilities that I think are continuing to be explored and continuing to optimize. You've already mentioned, right, BOPUS and you know, buy online, pick up in store, or home delivery. I think what you see is people trying to drive efficiencies to each of those models, and they don't always come out in the same exact way in terms of how they approach those efficiencies. I think sometimes you see different strategies depending on the different capability they're trying to develop. But yeah, that's at least my view right now.
So if I was for retailers, and I know, Jim, you talk to a lot of retailers about their development priorities.
Right.
How have you seen their focus change, and what are they talking to you about in that?
Yeah, I think there's a few things here, you know, kind of feeding off what Doug was saying. One thing that we have found is a lot of retailers, even if they had systems in place for e-commerce capability in store, let's say, or delivery or BOPUS or what have you, their systems really couldn't scale. The volumes have increased so dramatically that they were really faced with, you know, how do we support this? So, you know, a lot of work on legacy systems around order processing. How do we process fulfillment? You're seeing a lot of people move towards fulfillment out of their back rooms. So you're now starting to see automation happen in back rooms of stores. Just, you know, real creative ways to think about how do we address the issue. One of the other things that I think you could also look at here is just visibility to their supply chains. And so something that we're seeing from a software standpoint is really a lot of interest in control towers for supply chains, the ability to see where product is in transit, to understand what's going to be delayed. Those kinds of things have really skyrocketed.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, and I know, Greg, you talked about a loss of up to 8 points of margin. What are you seeing in terms of, or what are your thoughts around what retailers can do to help mitigate some of those expenses? We've talked about them doing it, but what are some of the tactics that you're seeing?
Well, there's a lot of them, and it really depends on where you are in terms of the supply chain, and you're looking at it from a perspective of that order. Just implementing something as simply as ways within the store, that sort of thing, to optimize who's picking. Do they know the store layout? What is the best way of doing the layout? Hey, there's a pile up in aisle 4, type thing. Avoid that to pick the orders is a big deal. The other thing is getting to more accurate inventory in the first place, because that's critical. It's the out of stocks that were hidden in the grocery sector when you walk in the store that have been exposed with all this online ordering. Now, typically you go through the aisle and you had one brand in mind of what you're going to pick up, and oh, they're out of that, I'm going to pick up something else. And it just goes off in your brain, and you're going to do that. But when you're specifying that specific item, the retailer has to make a choice. Do I cancel that item? Do I stop the process and ask if you're willing to take a substitute? Do I do that up front? Do I eat the margin and thus lose money on the deal? Or do I just tell them go to another retailer as a result? So that's one piece of it. The other thing is getting wiser about the scheduling of all these things in terms of deliveries, in terms of the scheduling for the pickup, and staffing appropriately to be able to handle the crush that's going involved. Ramping up on-demand suppliers from a transportation standpoint, that you have truck drivers that are able to take on the additional stuff there. We are going to see longer term a complete redo of supply chains and decisions on where things are going to be manufactured. Are we still going to rely on China? Are we going to look to Asia still and use the West Coast as our import? Or are we going to look to Eastern Europe for some things, or Latin and South America from a supply standpoint, and open up ports like in Miami and New Jersey to be more of the product coming in than we've seen previously, just so you have those alternative channels for those products.
I know it just occurs to me that to really scale this, the retailers have to start thinking about their stores more like warehouses.
Yep.
But then comes a whole set of policy decisions. So when I'm reaching for the last bag of flour and the picker is also doing it, who wins that decision? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Vanessa,
a big part of that too, how things are owned, because we got all these business guys, and you probably have a bunch of finance guys that are a part of this call. We're in our study right now, we're looking at ownership structure of the businesses, and the difference between a privately owned retailer that was able to have one person who could make the decisions, we're going to pivot and we're going to go 9 points different in sales growth between them and private equity owned guys, and about 5% on public guys.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Gary. Just one other point. I think something that we had not seen in North America, but we've seen in Europe for quite some time, is and it gets to your point around just the volume of people trying to pick goods in a store, right? It's overwhelming. It can't happen. We're now starting to see retailers in the U.S. actually move to dark stores. Where they're picking in a centralized location and then shuttling to the stores for fulfillment. Typically, you didn't see it because of the space between locations and so on in the U.S., but it's starting to happen now. You're seeing stores repurposed for that.
Yeah.
It's generally about 10 to 15% of total sales volume that is now digital for a store fulfillment that requires you to go to some alternate site there for a dark store.
Hey, Vanessa, I can't see your picture. Are you still with us?
I'm still here.
Okay.
I'm not sure what's visually going on.
It's the new reality with these calls. But I do have a question for you. Coming from the manufacturing side, I know that some of the suppliers, you guys have experienced some disruption all the way up the supply chain as well. And what sorts of capabilities are you guys seeing from your CPG and B2B businesses to leverage and kind of stabilize these operations?
Yeah, I think the guys kind of hit on the head earlier as well. So as we think about from the manufacturing side, our suppliers, it was of the utmost importance that we had contingency and just vendors that were not based in China, but actually domestically sourced. So I think that was a key piece to why we didn't stop running, because we had alternate suppliers from glass to our produce to all of the ingredients that we source had contingency plans. So I think that was a big piece of it. Second, because we have to go to market through distributors that ultimately get us to retail, I think the guys talked about how the dark stores had to really become a kind of a new concept that was derived and really kind of doubled down on. And that is true, but I definitely saw a strain when it came to physically bringing the product to those retail warehouses to ultimately get fulfilled onto the shelves. So not that there was a lack of trucks out in the world, but the actual capacity and how they're cubing out those trucks began a game of trade-off. And so for us as it's not an essential item, if you will. We're not the toilet paper, we're not the commodity product. So in the game of capacity on a truck, was toilet paper or was kombucha going to make the truck? So oftentimes we were getting fulfilled at 80, 70% to what the orders were. And this group, as well as anyone, knows that the downstream effects of that, when the demand is high for a perceived immunity boosting product during a pandemic, just causes this vicious cycle of out of stock when we're already not being filled to capacity on the truck. So that was a big, big issue for us. And to the point earlier around being solely owned versus private equity owned versus larger company and the decision points that really kind of went into the right decisions to pivot, I saw firsthand how the retailers that we dealt with, from smaller mom and pop stores to kind of the larger big guys that have stakeholders of probably like board members upwards of double digits, really kind of causing the strain on the system, because to make fast decisions in order to get product to their customers took at least 10 hoops to go through and took about 2 months to really recover from that. So I would say those three issues were probably the biggest ones that affected the manufacturing side from a non-essential good.
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with the investment in the IT systems too. The shorter term thinking that we're going to buy this, we're going to spin them off, oftentimes doesn't lead to the investment in the technologies that were required to be in place to fully take advantage of it there as well.
Let me pivot just a little bit. I think I would direct this at Jim and also at Doug. The methodologies that were being used to forecast demand, and when this spike that nobody saw coming, but it may come again. So have you seen changes? And I'll start with Doug. Have you guys seen any changes in the way that you're forecasting and how you're looking at your supply chain? So to make sure that, number one, that it stabilizes and that you have inventory available because I know you guys also sell some of the essential products that we're all kind of looking for. But has there been have you changed anything in the way that you're forecasting your demand or any kind of methodologies so that this doesn't happen to the same degree again?
Good question, actually. Yeah, to some degree, the answer is yes. I mean, we sell One Wipe Charlie's. In the first 2 weeks of COVID, I think that's our number 2 selling product at 4X'd and stayed there for 3 months, 2 months, whatever it was. So we had a decent amount of stock and we were able to pivot quickly. We did run out of stock for a short period of time though, because that's just not something you can forecast. As a result though, I think we've also looked at, because we're a digital business, we do have what I'd call point of sale data, right? So we know what people are putting in their boxes. We know what people are signing up for. And so we're really trying to look and study those signals as closely as possible and detect any sort of anomalies or trends, especially in COVID, but just general policy now or general practice. And the quicker we can see things that seem like they are spiking, the faster we can respond and get some resupply going. We are sitting on a little bit heavier as a result of some of the goods that are so critical in COVID, some raw pack and whip stock as well, that we can convert quicker in order to address any sort of spikes.
Jim, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, Gary, I think one of the things that we're seeing is really a much higher demand for AI, ML infused forecasting, and really the ability to consume external feeds into the forecast, right? So things that may be driving, new information on COVID hotspots or things like that, additional information on supply chain lag or whatever it may be, but really bringing in more inputs into the forecast than, let's just say, the typical deterministic forecast that's been done for years and years and years.
And I can tell you from my perspective at ESRI, we've seen an enormous demand for really precise, localized data about COVID infection, about, looking for some of the correlations that can indicate some of the triggers that might indicate another rush on specific products.
Right.
Varun, I'm going to pick on you. So just as we think about some of the metrics out there and what people are, what tools that the retailers are using and what sorts of things that they're building. What sorts of things are you seeing in terms of vendors and suppliers that want access to data, and how are they using it in their forecast and their fulfillment options?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Like in the past, what have we seen? Like most of the time, retailers were doing the forecasting because they had the data, the access to the local stores. But with the digital transformation and the e-commerce platforms emerging, like a lot of these digital platforms are providing the APIs where they can get the feed, as Jim alluded, right? They can get the data, region level data, even the zip level data to determine the impressions, like how much queries are coming related to what kind of product. And they can also, based on that, optimize the tags around their product. The second is they have information around the click-through rates and the conversion rates. So based on those information, they are able to put their inventory in we call ideal placements in a better way. So I'm seeing many of the suppliers, they are renegotiating the contracts with the fulfillment in this whole ecosystem. There are multiple fulfillment partners, so they're renegotiating the contracts and deploying their inventory at a more regional level rather than at the national level in the previous days.
Sure. Okay, next question, and thanks for that answer. One of the things that we saw a lot before the pandemic was really kind of the blurring in this market between suppliers and retailers. We see retailers providing more private label merchandise and doing more verticalization of their supply chain. In the meantime, suppliers have been more aggressive about reaching consumers directly through e-commerce and kind of bypassing that retail channel. And I'll start with you, Varun, again. So have you seen, during the pandemic, have you seen any effect on how suppliers are reaching the consumers? And I'd be curious if your thoughts is this is going to continue when, God willing, this pandemic is behind us one day.
Great question. Thanks, Gary, for asking this. What we have seen, since the emergence of all these digital marketplaces, yes, the supply chains are becoming more of a value chain, which means we are removing all these middlemen, or the distributors and the wholesalers and many even retailers. So the lines are blurring for many years. But how this has changed the COVID-19 is we have to understand, as Greg alluded, that out of stock. When the retailers were going out of stock, people were giving up their lifestyle and the association with the communities or the product, and they were going for the alternate products. And that's where these other suppliers that were out there who were not having many impressions, who were not having much sales, now they were able to connect with the customers. And now we have seen a huge shift in consumers. Now, initially they were having subscription models, let's say with the Charmin toilet paper, and they were ordering every month from Amazon. But now we are seeing the trends have been shifting and they are willing to try other things. They are going after price and the value, especially given the economic conditions and all that. There is a shift toward the private labels and also the alternate products out there. And post-pandemic, it's very hard to say. I wish I have the magic wand or the crystal ball, but definitely there are going to be some trends in that direction that people will change and they include more of the products, at least in the essential goods market. We're going to see some But in the discretionary, people tend to associate more with the lifestyle, with the community, that belonging to that product, which I think many suppliers, especially if they are having few SKUs in their product catalog, they struggle with that.
Hey, Greg, I know you and I have talked about this on the sidelines of some events and things. What are you seeing in terms of has there been an impact on verticalization? Have you seen, and I would think it would express itself as retailers narrowing their SKUs to try to really focus in on the ones they know they can keep in stock.
Yeah.
Have you, and you know, if toilet paper is a problem, I mean, my experience is whatever SKU they have is what I get when I'm there.
Right.
But in other categories, do I really, you know, do I need to have 25 options of a product when I really can only focus on 3 or 4 and make sure those are in stock? Are you seeing that in the market?
We are, and I think Varun hit on it too, the verticalization. The one thing that COVID did, as we mentioned earlier, all these things were trends and then they just exploded because of COVID. One of those is moving to generic brands or store-based brands and testing those for the first time. If the store brand was the only thing that was the only toilet paper in sight, or was the only wipes that were in sight, et cetera, you may have tried that for the first time. Well, the retailer makes twice the margin when you buy a vertical or a store-bought brand like that. And so that's a net benefit longer term on that. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I think retailers right now are sort of in this debrief of what in the world just happened during that period of time, because it was just chaos in that short period of time, and then regrouping and saying, what is it that we can get? How much of it can we get? Can we store it? What do we need to do? If there's a second wave, which was the big case, what do we need to have? I'm not sure the post-COVID full discussion has happened for a lot of retailers right now, because, you know, like all of us, and James knows, Jim knows this, you don't install during Christmas or during the holidays. You don't install the systems during that time. Well, for half the market, the whole year has been Christmas. You know, when you look at the grocery segment, they were up 80 to 90% for a 2-month period, but they're still up double digits. They planned for a 3% growth, and they're still up, you know, 4 times what they were planning to do. So it's really hard to think longer term and make those adjustments longer term. It's more tactical right now to say, how long is this going to last, and when do we think we can make those tactical decisions going forward? But there's no question, investment in technology is there.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
Just to add on to that, I would say that from the retail point of view, a lot of the category managers are really, I mean, the right thing to do by their own set is really to SKU rationalize their own set. And what that means is they're going to cut off the tail of what's not moving for them, whether it be low margin, low turns. And I think this only accelerated how they're looking at that. But I would say, as the brand owner, we also have to be looking at that. That's not a defensive move. We have to be on the offense with that. And so when we move, you know, and pivoted to double down on e-commerce, I think it's a stance to kind of give that experience to the consumer from a discovery standpoint. And it's not something that you're going to find in store. You may find your hero SKUs, and that's important to think about too. But if you're not a commodity product, I think a subscription model works well for that. But if you're really a brand trying to grow awareness, trying to get more consumers as loyalists, you do need to have a strong tie to them. And how your brand comes alive through the digital footprint is really important. I do think that is the wave of the future. And we just have to accept that private label is here, but it's how we understand and speak the dialogue around category management, and how private label plays a part, but isn't necessarily the whole story around building that category.
I was just going to say, I can imagine, you know, thinking back to my days as a category manager myself and using some of the tools from Blue Yonder back in the day, that the planogram sets were always, it's an expensive proposition, so we didn't do them very often. But it feels like, and I heard this in an earlier discussion today, if I've got a lot of holes in my planogram, if I've got a lot of holes at my shelf, I need to be much more nimble and reset these things more often, because my consumer demand is changing all the time. And it hasn't stabilized yet, to your point. Sorry, Jim, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. I think part of this, the SKU rationalization and the space planning component is part of my portfolio at Blue Yonder. And, one of the things we saw was SKU rationalization kind of forced on retailers, right? And what we haven't talked a lot about is the impact to the bigger CPGs, the consumer packaged good companies, right?
Yeah, please.
Had huge impact on their supply chains. You saw dramatic SKU rationalization happening with the CPGs. I can speak of one very large CPG that dropped almost half their SKU count to just focus on essential product to get that out. So what we're seeing now is really, you're not seeing a lot of innovation coming out of the large manufacturers right now. And we're probably going to have a lot of pent-up demand for a huge wave of innovation hitting retailers. The retailers are going to have to really.
Okay. Jim, we lost you briefly. Can you guys still hear me? Okay.
I can hear you. Yeah, I think one of the things Jim was getting to was that there are some sacred cows that have been in retail about how we do things from a brand, how we sell location on the shelves.
Mm-hmm.
And COVID blew a lot of those things up. And
Yeah, sure.
at some point, there's going to be a reevaluation of that at the store, of saying, do I really make my money by selling real estate in the store? Or do I make my money by having, being more like an Amazon or somebody where I've got my basic line there instead of the brand proliferation of SKUs? I'm focused and centered on that. Is that how I'm going to make money going forward?
So I have to throw my moderator hat on really quick, because we're getting some questions coming in that I want to make sure we get to. And the first one actually was specifically for you, Doug. Global subscriptions to e-commerce is forecasted to grow in the next several years. Millennials in particular are adopting this. Have you seen that? And is this something that you guys are reacting to in your business?
Yeah, certainly. For sure during the COVID period as well. I mean, we saw quite a trend towards buying online, and our sales went up as a result, being an online-only provider for the time. And so that's a trend that was affected largely by the pandemic. But more so, I mean, I think, you're seeing the shift in behaviors, right? People that didn't have online buying experience in the past had to develop it quickly, right? So you see others jumping into the fray here in terms of buying behaviors. But this next generation it's an online generation. They don't have the same fears and concerns. They're very comfortable buying things online. And I think the expectations of super fast, flexible, delivery and product assortments is critical. And I think, just a quick experience, even in LA, when you go into a retail store, you typically find a lot of things are out of stock, right? Because there's just so many people that live here. So I think when you think about online buying, though, typically you're able to find access to the products that you want to buy, and you can buy them, versus in store, there's a lot of out of stock challenges. So I think you see that, in terms of Dollar Shave Club, certainly we're trying to capitalize on that. We've grown fairly well during this pandemic, and we expect with these buying behaviors, we do expect them to stick. And so we're doing the best we can to offer fast, cost-effective products that people need.
Sure. And let me ask, and I think, and Vanessa as well on this, sort of to take a little tangent off of that. What do you see as kind of the special challenges for companies as they're trying to reach? You're trying to reach. You started with an online only presence. Now you're trying to reach into brick and mortar. And what do you think are some of the things that have to be overcome to be able to do that?
Well, I definitely think you can't have kind of breaking into retail without kind of the financial model kind of thinking that through. So. Sure. To the point around, innovation, I think there's a lot of innovation out there, but in order to really break into brick and mortar, the cost of doing business, from slotting fees to, trucking fees, everything from lumber to holding fees is a thing. And, when we started our business, we were self-delivering to the stores here in Los Angeles. We didn't actually understand the cost through the supply chain and what that meant. And so as I think about kind of our innovation that we're launching and brands that are really trying to break into brick and mortar to launch innovation, it is a balance around how to fund it. Knock on wood, luckily we are profitable, but the game of M&A isn't the same as it was pre-COVID. And so I think that's really a component to understand the cost of doing business here. And then the second is, what is the consumer looking for now? I definitely think it's different than what it was before. And that's an inherent, I think the companies that will launch innovation well and those that will break into brick and mortar will have a new spin on reaching their consumer. And I definitely think that's probably the biggest challenge, is to make sure that the right product market fit is there for the consumer of tomorrow.
Sure, makes sense. One of the other questions that came on is talking about some of the extension of capabilities that companies are, at the end of the day, it's all about being relevant to your customers. And in the marketplace right now, the time for delivery from order in the store to get it to your front door, that has become, everybody's laser focused on how do I make that shorter and how do I make that more accurate. But what the question is, and I think it's a good one, is how is this, this puts, to your point earlier, Greg, some of the smaller and medium-sized companies at a bit of a disadvantage. If they either have the choice of outsourcing that and incurring the cost that way, or if they do it themselves. This is really a unique capability that has to be stood up. That's kind of difficult. And I'm wondering, and I'm going to start with you, Jim, just because you guys have such a keen focus on supply chain. How are you seeing companies enable these sorts of the home delivery and some of the logistics around that, and how is that impacting overall their supply chain? And do you think there is a case to be made for a small company who's looking at trying to invest in this, and how can they do that efficiently?
Yeah, small companies, I think it's just about every local restaurant that I deal with, right?
Yeah.
And everyone seems to have found a way to have a website, to have an app, to accept an order, to find a way to deliver it to your front door in order to stay in business. And there, a lot of small companies that have emerged to help, these small businesses one-off to build out their websites, to enable that. You see the boom with DoorDash and plenty of the others. I think even before this, even for a large company, there was almost no reason for a large grocer not to have a capability to get to your home, right? They could use a third party to do that. They didn't need to build the capabilities themselves. And I think that's just expanded into for the smaller businesses. And that's, the reality is if they didn't have that, many of them would be out of business.
Yeah, no question. Varun, question for you. So as we talk about these capabilities and the amount of data that's being generated, this is going to also, I think, have an impact on, from a customer relevancy standpoint, and as you build out your customer data, how do you see companies managing that, and how is that going to affect their ability to continue to be relevant for those customers?
Yeah, the biggest thing that we saw during this COVID-19 was the companies that were deeply integrated in their supply chains, all the way to the source of raw material. They got early signals, and they were able to pivot quickly, and they changed their advertised spend from on brick and mortar to more on online. For example, Nike is a perfect example. Like we saw a huge shift and early on in Q1, Q2 that they were going for online advertisement. And that's why you see like Nike had a very less disruption, or like only 5% dip in their sales compared to many other had 50% because of out of stock or many other issues. And I think in the coming years, many retailers, manufacturers, or manufacturers, they will focus more on deeply integrating their supply chains digitally, not just one level deep or two level deep, but they all the way to the raw material and analyzing the signals. The second is about the capability, like we learn in MBA 101 is all about supply chain, is all about optimizing for the cost, be lean and just in time. But I think Toyota learned that in 2011 during Fukushima, that many of the parts that they were building in Japan and they're supplying the global, and how it disrupted their entire supply chain. They then went for the regional model. But I think this COVID-19 will, many of the retailers and the manufacturers will adopt that strategy. And rather than thinking more of a global, may shift toward regional, and also deeply integrating and analyzing the signals and looking at the data more carefully, from inventory placements all the way to the raw material. So I think those will be a lot more successful in the coming years compared to the companies who are not much deeply technically integrated or can't scale quickly enough.
So Greg, let me ask you similar same, because you did report on this transfer of wealth, and you've talked about the impact on small and medium. What would you tell some of these smaller businesses to, what are some of the tactics that they can employ to try to mitigate some of this transfer and to be relevant as well?
Well, I think it depends on where is their business coming from.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, if they're online, their business, depending on the type of retailer they are, their business can be all over the world, versus if the vast majority of their delivery business is local there. So if you're local and you expect that the vast majority of your stuff's going to be local, teaming up with other small retailers and sort of a consortium or a marketplace there to where you're pulling orders together. So it's not all a one-off, where it's one Uber Eats driver picks up one order to deliver to one place, but much the same way an Amazon driver's got a full truckload of stuff going to a zip code, you're able to do that. And I think there's going to open up this opportunity to have these almost shipping marketplaces or local shipping marketplaces for the smaller retailers that are in place. It's really going to be, in most cases, unfortunately, the next generation of small retailers that come in thinking that way as a result of that. And I think from a larger retailer standpoint, it's almost like the experience of COVID is we've got to take more of an IT approach to our supply chain. I don't mean deploying more IT, but as we plan it out, we have to eliminate those single points of failure, those choke points that are causing the problems that will shut us down, and planning those out. And it may be multiple supply chains, multiple sources, et cetera, that's going to be the end result of this.
Sure. Thank you. So let me pivot a little bit and let's talk now really kind of specifically around COVID. And Doug, I'm going to start with you on this, but as we've seen community infection rates impact operations all across the supply chain, are you finding that real-time data is making a difference in how companies are able to manage operations and reduce risk for their employees and their customers?
Well, I think, from Dollar Shave Club's perspective, I mean, it sounds cliched, but I mean, we did put employee safety first and foremost. We were fortunate enough to be able to continue to run throughout this pandemic. So I think the local data, the real-time data certainly is helpful, but I can tell you that from the beginning, we kind of just went to the top echelon of what we're going to do from a employee safety standpoint. And we've just left that in place the whole time, whether or not the community infection rates have dipped or whatever else. I mean, we're still doing twice-a-day temperature scans. We're still doing, of course, lots of sanitation, monthly fogging, masks, and a lot of other protocols. And from the beginning, we've just decided we're going to leave those things in place. And so I think from our perspective, at least Dollar Shave Club, I mean, it's helpful to have the real-time data, but it hasn't necessarily changed our approach. We've just kind of jumped to a very, very high standard and left it in place the entire time.
I know, and I can speak from our perspective at ESRI, really the real-time data in terms of being able to build dashboards and help our customers, especially in the boardroom, be able to see, day to day the impact across their enterprise, what stores, what facilities, what's up and running. This has become a really critical component, and we've worked with a lot of companies to help build these sorts of things. And this kind of leads us to a question that came in from the audience, which is, how is the labor force going to be impacted, especially in sectors that have a large human resource component, hospitality, travel, tourism. And I'm going to ask somebody who wants to chime in on that one. I think that's kind of a big question. Varun?
Go ahead, Varun.
Yeah, I can take a stab on it because under my PA, Commerce PA at Google, we have travel also. We have seen a huge impact on the travel due to the COVID. But what I see, it's absolutely right. There is a large human resource component that got impacted by this, and it's going to continue. But for years, we are spending a lot of time on automation. And in the coming years, we are thinking that there's going to be a lot more use of AI and virtual reality and all those VRs, like in my home gym. Now I don't have a personal trainer, but I have this video monitor that I just look at and I perform, and they do my pose analysis and they make sure that I'm lifting the dumbbells right and I'm not making any mistake. And I think the same thing will happen in the travel and tourism, those kiosks and a lot more customized experience that customers gonna see through this AI and virtual reality, so that they can make better decisions on how they're gonna be spending. It's amazing that I just went to the hospital a few days ago for just annual checkup, not something serious, but I've seen how many steps in that has been automated already, and it's touchless.
Yeah.
And I interacted with just one person in the whole chain versus where I used to interact with, and that to just get a new mask. Prior to that, I used to interact with so many different people from reception to whatever, and everything has changed. And I think same gonna continue in the long term. And especially from the retail perspective, I think all these companies have already started investing in building touchless payments, touchless many of the experiences, and that's going to continue and grow in several verticals and several organizations.
Yeah, the piece I would add is that there were technologies that previously were being sold and pitched as labor-saving devices. Electronic shelf labels, self-checkout devices, kiosks, etc. And they would get pushback because they were the belief that they would cut jobs. Those have been reframed for the next 18 months or so as associate and consumer safety. And the end result is you are seeing massive adoption. Walmart has gone to an all self-checkout store. You're seeing most grocery stores double, triple the number of self-checkouts in their stores. So a lot of those things are happening because we've reframed it, and that's going to be changes that we're going to see in all these sectors for sure.
Absolutely. I think one of the just my local Home Depot with the touch-free lockers. I mean, that just struck me really as a innovation that was really interesting, that makes a ton of sense. And which leads me to our last question, and we're running out of, we have about a little over 5 minutes left, but I know this one will be near and dear, and let's everybody go around the room on this one. I'm going to start with Vanessa. So let's fast forward to the hopefully very near future. The pandemic is behind us. Some of all the things we've been talking about with the capabilities and these different technologies that were being employed to meet our customers' needs, which one of these do you think are going to have are going to continue to be important for consumers, for retailers, for manufacturers? What do you think is going to stick around and continue even after we've recovered from this pandemic?
So from a manufacturing standpoint, I think there's two things that were really critical. So this may be blasphemous to those on this phone call, but we did not have an ERP system up until June of this year. And I will say that the visibility to real-time inventory and further automating our processes is mission critical for us. Also, from a pandemic aside, I think that's just what we have to do from a company strategic standpoint. But from a, going along with the times, it has made us stronger to respond to inventory needs, supply issues. We're able to pivot quickly.
Sure.
And I would say from the retail standpoint, what isn't going away is the fact that e-commerce and click and collect and alternative ways to get your items as opposed to walking into a store is here to stay. And I think that's really important that as a leader within CPG, brands need to understand that and work in harmony with our retailers to not fight it, but understand how we're working together to kind of meet the consumer's needs together.
Sure, thank you. All right, next I'm going to pick on Varun.
I think I just touched before, like the capabilities. What I think is EH&S going to be a huge importance, and how they're going to be designing their manufacturing and the supply chain going to be a critical. From technology's perspective, I think the deep integration of their systems is very critical for the small and medium businesses. Right now, this whole e-commerce ecosystem is lacking the integration. So there are many warehouse companies, there are last mile logistic companies, there are middle mile, but there is a huge product gap to integrate all those seamlessly for the retailers or the small and medium businesses. I think that is something gonna be critical, and many companies gonna fall in that. I know Google, we try to integrate all these different players and connect the users or the customers to the retailers through that. The other capabilities, I think people got a little insensitive. I know there is a question around 1 to 2 days same delivery, and that was a big importance for, like, everyone was going for next day, same day deliveries. And we have seen pre-COVID that many companies saw 4x, 5x conversion or click-through rate when their estimated delivery dates were 1 day or 2 days compared to if they had 5 days or more. And but with the COVID, people are less sensitive to the shipping time, but more sensitive to price. So I think there is that has given a birth to a lot more sales increase for the drop ship merchants, and I think that is something that gonna continue, and also all these drop ship merchants will see how they can forward deploy their inventory to optimize for the consumer experience as well in the post-pandemic time.
Right. I'm sorry to cut you off. We're going to run out of time. I'm concerned about that. Doug, really quick, what do you think is going to have some stickiness?
Maybe just a couple of quick ones to add then. Where Unilever is our parent company, one of the things I've seen they're starting to do is actually sitting on a little bit more idle capacity for their internal manufacturing. So they're growing their third-party manufacturer partnerships to try and put stable demand there, leaving a bit more responsiveness in-house to be able to handle the volatility and uncertainty that's hard to predict. So you're seeing that. And you're also seeing, I think, a bit of a renewed focus on shortening lead times, and also some dual sourcing activities to just try and buffer some of the risk out there, not only from like COVID, but geopolitical, you name it.
Yeah. Greg, really quick.
Two things. One, I think the free delivery that we're seeing right now is not sustainable. They're going to have to start charging for that just because the business model is not there. I'm talking about the grocers and that side. The second thing is it's the race to accurate inventory. Whoever gets to accurate inventory first and can apply AI and machine learning to that wins. That's why you see the Walmart, the Targets, and the Krogers of the world investing in computer vision and RFID technology in their stores.
I want to make sure Jim gets a chance as well.
Yeah, and real quickly, I'll just feed off the AI ML piece. I think, leading into COVID, it was, people always said AI ML. I don't know they knew all the use cases. I think use cases have really started to emerge around how it drives efficiency, how it drives automation, how it drives quicker decision-making, all vital during this period.
Sure. Okay, we are right at the time. I want to thank all the panelists. You guys, it was great working with all of you. Thanks for all of your insights. And we are exactly at 6:15. So, or I'm in the Midwest, so 6:15 in Minnesota. But thank you, everybody.
Thank
you.
you.